Hey everyone, so the last video that I posted was about fear versus seeking systems. And towards the end, after explaining the research, I talked about why fear tactics do not work in the 21st century. And I wanted to dive deeper into that concept. So the fear tactic approach became relevant whenever scientific management was presented, which was the type of management that really came to fruition during the industrial revolution. So whenever we had machines and we were part of the conveyor belt, we needed a manager to ensure that we were getting the work done that we needed to get done. And it was a do this, if you don't, there's a punishment type of approach. Well, to explain why that doesn't necessarily work, I wanted to touch upon an experience that I had, starting with the first management position that I ever held, which was a team lead for a company and that I used to work for. And during the interview, they asked all the questions that are appropriate to that. How are you going to manage this team? What are your expectations? Da da da. But after the interview, I was actually fairly friendly with the manager, and he gave me insight of how he thought the interview went, and more specifically, how the manager above him thought the interview went, and me as a candidate. And one of the concerns that they had was that they thought that I was going to be too nice in the role. And I found that very intriguing. I found that was odd, to wonder if a manager was going to be too nice. And I don't know if they meant that the opposite of nice was mean in this situation. But for me, over time, I actually understood why they were asking that, and not in a positive light. The manager that was asking or concerned about me being too nice was a micromanager. And he had to have his hand in every single employee's pot, so every step of the way he was saying, hey, why don't you have this? Why aren't you sending these emails? Why don't you have this many calls? Why don't you? So he was really having that fear system embedded in our team, which was frustrating at the time, because the manager and myself were really focused on turning that culture around, because we came from a manager that was very disengaged, in a sense, kind of the opposite of a micromanager. And the company culture, the team culture, was very unmotivated, low morale, very tough to come to work and feel inspired. And what we did was we started approaching this, and this was before I was team lead. We started approaching this as, how can we get these team members back on board and believe in what it is that we're doing? And part of being able to turn that team around and turn that culture around was the skill of being nice. And the reason that this is important is because there are a lot of managers out there that feel that fear-seeking or being mean, or I guess in the sense what they were really saying was, we want to make sure that you're able to hold people accountable. We want to make sure that you're able to have these tough conversations. Which brings me back to my point. You can be nice and still hold people accountable. You can be nice and still have tough conversations. In fact, the nicer you are, I feel like the better relationships you're going to build with your team. And the better relationships that you have with your team, the easier it is to call them out, so to speak. So there's an example of my approach versus the manager's approach. So the manager's approach to a struggling employee was to ask them, why don't you have this many candidates? Why don't you have this many calls? Why don't you? And basically hounding them with questions and never really finding the root cause of what was going on in that person's situation, because every situation is different and every candidate is different. So my approach, because I was shifted the employees who weren't performing as well, and so whenever I took that employee over as a direct report, I got to know him, and I understood that this particular position was not a lifelong career for him. It was, he needed to have an income. He needed to have health care. He needed to have these options available at his hands because he had a girlfriend or a wife at home and they needed to support each other. So my approach was to get to understand who this person was, who this employee was beyond the responsibilities of the job. So what I did was I had one-on-one conversations with him, and I started with, what is the purpose that you want to achieve? What is your purpose, your ultimate goal? If you could do anything in life, what is your goal? And it turned out that he wanted to own his own gym, which on the side he was personal training. And what I did there was, instead of saying, well, we need to focus on what you're doing here because this is your job, and if you don't do it, you're going to be punished. Instead of saying that, we reflected and we said, okay, I understand that. I have goals outside of this company as well. Now we're relating. He's saying, okay, now I can be vulnerable. I can speak to what I really want to say. And whenever we were able to take his goal and match it to the responsibilities of what he was doing on a day-to-day task, we were able to improve his engagement. We were able to improve his productivity. So with being a personal trainer, with being a gym owner, you have to be able to sell your product. Because there's tons of gyms out there, and you want to be the differentiator, the differentiating factor that brings people into that company. So we said, okay, well, you're making calls all day. What can that teach you? Well, it can teach you to be a better salesman. It can teach you the type of things that you need to learn whenever you're talking to these potential clients. And there was a couple other things that we put in there as well. But that one example shows you that if you are nice to your people, because you have to remember, whenever you become a leader, they don't serve you, you serve them. And if it's the other way around, nobody's going to trust you. If you're not willing to bite the bullet, to take a sacrifice for your employees, then you're going to lose trust almost immediately. And it's going to be hard to gain that back. So looping back to the fear versus seeking system, whenever the micromanager was talking about, you need to do this, why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing this? You need to get your numbers up or you're going to be gone. Versus the seeking system, where it says, what are the talents that you need to develop to go and achieve your dream? Identify those, relate those to the position that they're currently in. And then going back to the 21st century, the reason that scientific management is not the key is because it holds people in this circle. It's hard to get outside. Seeking systems allows them to open up and go explore other things while they're still achieving and growing in your own company. So I hope this explains the fear versus seeking system a little bit further in detail. And if you have any questions, definitely drop a comment or DM us. Thank you.